Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today the landmark Abraham Peace Agreement is earning its title as the gift that keeps on giving, following new reports that both Bhutan and Morocco are now set to normalize with Israel next. But unlike in the United Arab Emirates, reactions in the ground in Morocco and Bhutan are a little bit more mixed, as local Islamist groups are very vocally rejecting the move, while most others on either side celebrate the news.
علاقات المغرب مع إسرائيل فيها عدة مستويات. أولا المستوى الإنساني، هناك أكثر من 1,000,000 يهودي مغربي يعيشون في إسرائيل وهم مرتبطون بوطنهم المغربي الأم ولهم وجود دائم، ومن شأن فتح العلاقات واستئناف العلاقات الدبلوماسية وفتح خطوط جوية جديدة هو أنه سيسمح لهم بالتواجد الدائم في المغرب وإقامة أنشطتهم هنا، وهذا حقهم ما دامهم مغاربة. من الناحية الثانية العلاقة مع استئناف العلاقات الدبلوماسية مع إسرائيل ستخدم منطق مصالح شعوب وتدفق المصالح الاقتصادية وما إلى ذلك، وهذا هو منطق السياسة الدولية في عصر يتسم بالعقلانية. أيضا هناك بعد آخر يتعلق بالقضية الفلسطينية، المغرب سيقوم بكل ما من شأنه في تحركات على مستوى المجموعات الدولية أو على مستوى علاقته التي استؤنفت مع إسرائيل من أجل إيجاد مخرج للقضية الفلسطينية وحل هذا النزاع الذي عمر طويلا.
هذا الشرف اللي خديناه تحت الرعايه ديال سيدنا الله ينصرو غادي تضوي على كل شيء، غادي تضوي على المغرب كامل، وغادي توصلوا لواحد الدرجه اللي غادي الدول الاخرين غادي يشوفوا فيه بواحد النظره واحده اخرى، اللي هي ماشي ديك النظره اللي هي تيبغيو يكحلوا ولا هذا يضعفونا. بالعكس غادي ديك الساعه غادي تبان الخدمه اللي كاينه، المعيشه ماشي غير التعايش، تنقول الاحترام اكثر من التعايش بين اليهود والمسلمين اللي كاينين كمثال باش ان شاء الله غدا يكون حتى هو اتفاق ما بين اسرائيل وفلسطين، وحتى هذاك المشكل حتى هو يتحل، لقاش لازم باش حتى هو يتحل باش كل شيء يبقى مرتاح ونعيشوا واحد الجيل واحد اخر. So
the new diplomatic relation with Morocco is something that is really good for both of the countries. I hope it's just going to be the beginning of more diplomatic achievements between Israel and other Middle Eastern countries, and also North African, of course. And hopefully the Palestinians will also be the next ones.
Well, joining us now to discuss is Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies, Dr. Sarah J. Foyer, and Ben-Dor Yamini, Ynet journalist, author, and attorney. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, Dr. Foyer, I'm going to start with you. What are your initial reactions to the two new deals, specifically Morocco?
Sure. Well, in one respect, I think this was not a surprise. I mean, the ties between the countries had existed before. As the gentleman who was interviewed in the clip you showed just a moment ago, there are several 100,000 Jews of Moroccan origin in Israel. And so in that sense, I think there was groundwork already prepared for this. On the other hand, it was a surprise to the extent that, in the last few years, Morocco actually was quite lukewarm in its response to the Trump administration's approach to trying to seek peace relations between Israel and the Arab states. We saw, for example, that they sent a pretty low-level representative to the economic conference in Bahrain a couple of years ago that Jared Kushner and others had put together. So in that sense, I think it was a surprise, a welcome surprise, but a surprise nonetheless.
Ben-Dor, how about you? What are you reacting, and what do you make of what Dr. Foyer just said in terms of the response from Morocco?
Yeah, okay. First of all, we have to welcome this kind of peace because of many, many reasons. Now, many people argue against this kind of agreement that it is motivated by interest. So what is so bad about interest? Yes, both sides have interest, so it's not the problem. And Morocco is receiving recognition about West Sahara from the United States. So, okay, this is part of the international relationship between states. It's part of the deal. What we have to bear in mind is that something is changing in the Arab world. We have to bear in mind that it's 5 maybe 10 years now, that we all read articles that are much more pro-Israel and pro-peace, and saying in one way or another, look, we cannot be dependent again and again by the Palestinians, speaking about regional relationship. Now, the change is coming. I mean, if you follow the memory publications, even if you don't read the Arabic, you know that there is a change in the atmosphere. I will not go to the extreme and say that the majority support this kind of relationship. We don't know. We don't have polls in Morocco. We know that the Islamic party in the last elections, they won something like 33% of the vote. So yes, they are strong. Just some weeks ago, the Prime Minister, Al-Othmani, declared no normalization with Israel. And here we have normalization with Israel. So it's coming, we all guess, from the king.
Well, so this brings us back to the question, though, again, and Dr. Foyer, maybe you can jump in. Why then did it take so long for this to happen when, as you both seem to be saying, the writing has been on the wall?
Well, I think the key element here was what the Trump administration was willing to offer the king. I mean, this gift of the recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over the Sahara, this is quite significant from Rabat's point of view. This is something they've been wanting for decades now. So I think the Moroccans saw an opportunity. They wanted to seize it. I think we do need to be a little bit careful about, this is, I would not necessarily use the word full-blown normalization for what we've seen just yet with Morocco. I mean, even in the official statement that came out of the palace, you don't see that word. You essentially see, with the exception of the establishment of direct flights, which really is an innovation here, you essentially see steps that look a lot like what the relationship looked like in the 90s. Now, that's not necessarily to minimize this, because, of course, that relationship and all of the progress that we saw was against the backdrop of progress on the Israeli-Palestinian front. And so here, the Moroccans are essentially saying, all right, we don't necessarily need to see much progress on the Palestinians in order to return to the status quo ante, which is in itself significant. But it's not normalization to the extent that we've seen with the Emirates and with other states.
Bendel?
Yes, I fully agree with Dr. Phil. Now, we have to understand that change is not coming in one day. So it's a process. It's a process. And this process, I mean, we had the Emirates, we had Bahrain, we had Sudan somehow, and now is Morocco. With Morocco, we had relationship. With Morocco, it's not only the 90s. During all the last 25 years, Israelis could receive visas to Morocco. So many Israelis, I don't know how many exactly, some sources are saying 50,000 a year or 90,000 a year, any number. Israelis were not hurt when they visited in Morocco. So the meaning is that the atmosphere was quite prepared for this kind of peace, normalization, even if, as she rightly said, not full normalization.
More to what you're saying, what does it say about the changes in general in the Middle East?
Well, this is a change. I mean, this is a change. We are not anymore dependent on the track with the Palestinians. I mean, we can make peace with Arab states. Yes, we want peace with the Palestinians. No, we cannot neglect it. It's a problem. It's something that should be solved in one way or another. But it doesn't look, and we have to admit it, it doesn't look like if the Palestinians are willing to any agreement based on 2 states for 2 peoples. I mean, that's what we need, actually. I mean, to anyone who is supporting the 2-state for 2 people solution, we have to admit Palestinians are not willing to accept it. It's not that they rejected the Trump peace plan. They rejected the Clinton plan. They rejected any plan that could give both sides self-determination. They are against it, and we must admit it. So in a way, in a very interesting way, what happened is that the Trump initiative promoted the peace with other Arab countries. I mean, and I think that the landmark was the 3 hours interview with Bandar Ben Sultan, that whoever saw it understood that something is happening, because he gave all the explanations. I mean, we tried. We did everything for them. And they refused. They rejected any plan. And it was a kind of a landmark, because it was, in a way, the best explanation to what we are facing right now with all these peace agreements.
All right, well, Dr. Feuer, back to you. Speaking more about the Palestinians here, what does this say to you about the effectiveness, the efficacy of President Trump's, plan in the Middle East, this transactional brokerage that he's been doing successfully?
Yeah,
I would argue.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of skepticism about it. To my mind, understandably so, that you could approach international relations generally and something as complicated as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict specifically, and take this sort of transactional kind of deal-making approach. But I think to some extent it has undeniably yielded some fruit, and we have to be honest about that. I do want to just go back for a moment, if I can, to your question about what this tells us about the Middle East more generally, because I think an important piece of this story is really what happened 10 years ago. I mean, we're now about to commemorate a decade since the uprisings across the region, what some, of course, refer to as the Arab Spring. And I think that one of the things that came out of that whole series of events was a recognition on the part of many of these regimes, and especially those leaders who survived all of these uprisings, that they really need to figure something out about the economic situation in their country, because they are now dealing with young populations who are frankly fed up, and who I think demonstrated a decade ago that they're no longer really afraid to take to the streets and make demands. So I think part of the, in an interesting way, maybe a byproduct of that awareness, that what really matters now and what counts for a lot of these young Arabs in the region, it's not that they're not sympathetic to the Palestinians, and it's not that they do not want to see a just solution for them. But frankly, the priority now is finding a job, having a decent education. And so I think for a lot of these leaders, they have started to prioritize the economic interests of these countries. And in a way, Israel became somewhat indispensable in that regard.
So going back to this whole transactional approach that we're kind of referring to Trump's brokerage here, the Trump administration's brokerage in the Middle East, does that then, given what you've just said, translate to a sound, prosperous future of peaceful ties, or are these ties maybe built on a hollow foundation that could change overnight?
So I think that's the $64 million question. The peace agreements that Israel has had with Egypt and Jordan, I think, stand as an interesting contrast in a way, and a sort of cautionary tale, because those agreements didn't ever really, the publics in these countries, I think, have not really been convinced that they've reaped any rewards from those agreements. Now we have the United Arab Emirates coming in and saying, we want this to really be fundamentally based on people-to-people ties. So if you start to see that these agreements do end up yielding real economic benefits for these populations, and not for a sliver of the elite, security or otherwise, then this really could end up being a turning point.
Ben-Doel?
Yeah, I generally speaking, I do agree. I just paid a visit to Dubai with Israeli Arabs, and it was quite interesting. It was quite interesting because you saw this kind of mutual wish to change something in the atmosphere, to change something, I mean, economically and in other aspects. Now, will it infect the Palestinians? We don't know. We just have to hope. I just want to remind us all that in the very day that the peace was declared with Morocco, in that very day, the General Assembly of the UN received something like 7 decisions against Israel. 7 decisions. I mean, they are crazy. I mean, we have to remember that outside, the world outside there is still dominated by this kind of dark regimes, but not only dark regimes. States like Germany and France supported decision about the right of return of the Palestinians. They don't really support the right of return of the Palestinians to Israel. I mean, when you speak with officials, and I do speak with them, no, they do not. But when they are going to the UN, they support decisions which are counterproductive to peace. Now, when the Palestinians see Germany and France and Denmark and other countries supporting this kind of decisions, they will never accept a solution that does not include the right of return. So we have a problem with the global left, with the so many states that think that by appeasing the Palestinians, we will achieve peace.
Well, so to follow up with what you're saying, though. But to follow up with what you're saying, because what you're describing is, maybe a change in the United Nations or in the global community resulting from some of these pieces.
Not yet.
So that's exactly my question, because in these in those very same General Assembly meetings, a lot of these anti-Israel resolutions that you're referring to were actually brought forward, or at the very least supported, by Jordan, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. Yes. Along with the Palestinian Authority.
And the Emirates and Morocco, we cannot forget. Right. I mean, it's not that they changed. It's not that they, from now on, they are going to vote together with Israel and Canada and so on. Not at all. It's not happening. We have to.
So what will it take? What will it take to make that change?
I mean, I think that diplomatically, we failed. Israel failed to explain Germany and other countries that supporting this kind of decisions is counterproductive to peace. Now, will a change come from Morocco and the Emirates? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure, but we have to know what the problem is. Not the only one. We have a problem of our own. We cannot forget that we have a right-wing government. But yet, the international community, whatever the international community is doing, is counterproductive to peace. I want peace. That's why I think that kind of decisions are against peace, are strengthening only the rejectionism of the Palestinians.
Dr. Foyer?
Well, I tend to look at these examples of the countries with which Israel has recently ostensibly made peace actually voting in favor of anti-Israel resolutions. I tend to look at that, I guess, in 2 ways. One is to say that, the diplomatic arena remains open and available to them to be able to maintain a little bit of their credibility and maybe bona fides when it comes to the Palestinian question, because they are facing criticism on the part of elements of these publics that have basically said, you've sold out the Palestinian cause, you've sold out the kind of what had been for decades the kind of main unifying cause in the Arab world. And so I think they probably see diplomatic arenas such as the General Assembly, which, let's face it, at the end of the day, the GA decisions don't really have much impact on the ground. The Security Council is something else, but they see that as a valve that they can open from time to time and use. But, in a weird way, it may actually end up being that if they can demonstrate to the Palestinians in some of these diplomatic arenas that they still have, solidarity and sympathy, and they still want to be advocating on the part of the Palestinians, then it may be, and maybe this is a bit of wishful thinking, but it may actually be that will shore up their credibility vis-a-vis the Palestinians, and then in that sense give them a bit more leverage when it comes to trying to potentially prod the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table. If they can approach the Palestinians from the standpoint of a more credible voice here, then chances are they will have perhaps more impact on the Palestinians down the road.
Well, and really what it sounds like you're describing is the very same, ethos that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are discussing when they're saying, we can make peace with the Palestinians in a roundabout way through peace with other Arab states. So is that what you're saying, that really is the case?
I don't know if that's the case. I don't think we have any proof yet. I mean, all we know right now is that some of these states have been willing to embrace relations with Israel in exchange for some pretty hefty gifts from Washington. I think that's about all we can conclude right now. I don't think we know yet whether this, even the scenario that I painted of that these Arab countries could potentially have more leverage over the Palestinians, we don't know yet. I mean, I don't know that they've tried just yet. So I think the verdict is the jury is still out on that one.
All right, Ben Dror, final comment. Would you like to respond to Dr. Foyer?
Just a very short story about how can we achieve peace with the Palestinians. We all know about the Arab Initiative that is supported by the Palestinians. But we have to bear in mind that before the Arab Initiative, we had the Saudi Arabia Initiative. The Saudi Arabia Initiative did not include Resolution 194, namely right of return for the Palestinians. Now, Saudi Arabia actually was forced to include it because of stories that I will not go to details now, but they were forced in 2002. Now, can we go back to the Saudi Arabia Initiative in one way or another? I don't know. I just don't know. I have no idea if it's possible right now, but the changes in the Arab world might maybe resume the original initiative, because I think that the original one can be much more accepted by not only Israel, by the international community, and by not all the Palestinians, but maybe if they will have brave leadership, it could change something even between us and the Palestinians, maybe.
All right, well, with that, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you again, of course, Dr. Sayer J. Foyer and Ben Dror for joining us. And tune in next time on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. Also, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.